In this video, I'm going to talk about the different parts of speech, the structure of phrases and parse trees, and grammars, in particular context-free grammars. So the main thing to notice here is that it's all about patterns. So for example, here we have a sentence like, the green one is in the corner, right? But green can be substituted by sad, intelligent, fat, so I can say the fat one is in the corner, right? There's a pattern. I have the word the, and then some set of adjectives that can go in here, and then, the rest of the phrase. That's a pattern. There are variations of this, like, these can be plural. If there's a verb, it can be past tense or whatever. Now, there's also subject-verb agreement one. So, for example, if I talk about a noun, then the word ends in s for some verbs. The verb ends in s for some of them. So, for example, the dog does tricks, as opposed to the dog do tricks. So it's about detecting these patterns. And what we're going to do is we're going to come up with a set of tags for the different places where we can insert patterns. So for example, if we need a noun for the sentence, a noun is basically an entity, like a dog, tree, idea, speech, freedom, any of those, and many others, right? We can have tags that distinguish them morphologically, like whether they're plural or singular. So for example, the word dog here will be tagged as a singular noun, an N. Dogs will be tagged as a plural noun. Then there are proper nouns, like if the entity is Joe, Microsoft, Chicago, I'm going to call that NNP, a proper noun. Now there's possessives. So for example, Joe's or Microsoft's Word, right, or Microsoft's programs. These apostrophe s, if there's a word with an apostrophe s indicating that it's of the noun, that it belongs to the noun, we're going to tag it N and $sign. Now there's adverbial, but time or place, like I'm home. Let's do it tomorrow. These are going to be tagged with NR. Okay. So I'm just going to describe a bunch of tags, and you will see that the language has a ton of patterns. And it's not even complete. Now, in the same way, there are many pronouns that we can tag, many kinds of pronouns. So the person of the pronoun, whether it's the first speaker, second, or third, right? Whether it's anaphoric, so referring to previous entities. So the man stood there. He was tall. He refers to the man previously mentioned. Nominative, so for example, if the pronoun is I, you, he, she, they, etc., I'm gonna tag them with PPS. If they're plurals, I'm gonna tag them with an extra s. If the pronoun is reflexive, like myself, yourself, if it's singular and plural, will distinguish that. Usually plurals is the same tag with an s at the end. You probably got that now. If the pronoun is possessive, my, mine, yours, your, etc., I'm going to tag them with a $sign. And this will be for plural. It can be $s as well. If the pronoun is accusative, so me, you, him, you, us, them, etc., I'm going to call them PPO. That's the tag. And so on and so forth. I'll be tagging determiners. So that's, that pencil. The that in there is a determiner. It refers to a noun. It'll be DT. Articles as a subclass of determiner. So the pen or a pen, it's going to be AT. Adjectives, right? So these are properties of a noun. So pretty, yellow, ideal. Adjectives are going to be JJ. Comparative, superlative. So for example, smarter, incredibly, right? This is smarter, incredibly, ending in ER, ending in LY. These are going to be the ones that end in ER and the ones that end in LY, or, cardinals, 1, 2, 3, they're going to be CD. And then ordinals, first, second, third, are going to be OD, for example, right? There are many subcategories within this one category. So I can go over more verbs now. Verbs can have the base form, the infinitive, and that's going to be VB, like walk, drive. Now, third singular present tense. So for example, this is walks, drive. So this is the third person singular, walks, he walks, she drives. I can call that VBZ. Gerund and participle, so walking, driving, so ing, right? And then driven, that's the participle. This is the gerund, the ing, and this is the participle. So driven. Read, as in this has been read. Past tense, walked, drove. That will be VBD, regular past tense. Auxiliary, so do, can, may, must, might, could, etc. These are auxiliary verbs because they usually accompany or refer to other verbs, right? So they do like the food. Like there is the main verb, the auxiliary is do, right? So those will be tagged with MD. And then particles. So these are verbs that are comprised of two words. So take off, pay up, show up, and so on, right? Those can also be tagged. Now, you had adverbs which modify the verb. So for example, the verb is visits, but then there's often, right? That modifies the verb. Here's a word ending in ly, right? But it's also an adverb because it modifies growing, as in rapidly growing. All the adverbs we're going to tag with RB. Now there's position and particles. So prepositions, these are small words that tell you where things are. So on, over, about, concerning, right? Those are going to be, or in. They're going to be tagged with the tag in. And then they're particles. So these are some prepositions that change a verb. So for example, off, as in take off, or give in, right? Or put me off, right? Those are RPs. So you can see that one word can have a couple of tags, right? And patterns are not clear-cut. We need to see what context they're in. There are conjunctions. So for example, they join words or phrases. So for example, husband and wife, right? It will rain or it will snow. That's CC, right? And then some subordinating conjunctions. She said that he would be late. This is blending this sentence and this one, right? I will not go if it is late. These are two sentences joined by this, right? Those are CS, the subordinating ones. Now, words are organized into chunks. We call these constituents, and then into phrases, right? So for example, this chunk, right? This is a constituent, right? The very tall woman with sad eyes, that's a constituent. So is another constituent. And then the happy man with a hat, that's another constituent. She saw him, 3 constituents. So these are the chunks of information. Now those chunks of information, we're going to see how they pair up and how they work. Now, for example, a chunk of information can be the tag NP. It's a noun phrase. It has all the information about the noun. Or a prepositional phrase, right, which is headed by a preposition and contains a noun phrase complement. So, in the back seat. Verb phrases, right? These are headed by the verb with elements that depend on the verb. So, for example, saw an elephant. That's a verb phrase because it starts with the verb, right, head of saw, and then with elements that depend on the verb, an elephant. So let's take an example. For example, that man caught the butterfly with a net. We can see that with a net, right, is a noun phrase. It modifies the noun a net, right? Now, because with is a preposition, right? It's a particular preposition, we can chunk all of this as a prepositional phrase, right? Now, caught the butterfly with a net. Caught is the verb, and then the butterfly with a net is the rest of the sentence. That is a verb phrase. That chunk here is a verb phrase because it's headed by a verb, and then it contains information about what happened with that verb. Also, that man contains information about the noun, so it's a noun phrase. by looking at this, we can start forming what is called, and this S is the sentence. By looking at this, we can start forming what's called a parse tree, okay? Because it looks like a tree upside down. This is the trunk, right? This is the tree with branches all over the place. So if you turn it upside down, it looks like, you know, like a tree. So now there's one more piece here. We can see that these chunks group these little elements. Like this verb phrase groups verbs in the past tense with noun phrases with prepositional phrases, and in turn prepositional phrases chunk prepositions with noun phrases, and so on and so forth. This will allow us to create rules. So for example, we can have a set of rules, or production rules also called, where for example you have a sentence will divide, any sentence will be divided into two chunks, a noun phrase and a verb phrase. The noun phrase can be divided into two different chunks here, or these other chunks, or it could be divided into these chunks. So there are many ways to divide a noun phrase. A verb phrase can be divided into these two chunks, or just this one thing, just a plain verb in the past tense, or these two chunks, or these three chunks here, right? So there's that is one division of a verb phrase. A preposition can be divided into these two, and we can see that NP then in turn can be divided into these many ways, right? So this can be recursively occurring. We can see that, for example, AT can only be the word the. A noun in plural in these rules can only be children, students, mountains. Of course, in natural language, it can be any plural noun, right? But for the sake of the example, in this little grammar, I'm defining symbols here and the rules of how can I chunk them until I can not chunk them anymore. So for example, in NNS, it can only be one of these. I cannot chunk children into anything else, right? So, for example, these are used for deriving sentences. So let's derive the sentence, the children slept, okay? The children slept. The is, where's the in here? The is AT. Children will have the tag here, NNS, right? And slept has the tag of VBD, right? And then, based on these tags, I will see what other symbols chunk those tags in some sense. So for example, let's start with this. The children slept. Based on the rules that we saw above, the is an AT, children is a noun plural, and verb is a verb in the past. Now, based on the rules earlier here, we know that AT pairs up with NNS. So if I have the children slept, I can pair these two together, right? I can pair these two together. And then VBD can also be chunked into a VP. Let's look at that. VBD by itself here can be chunked into a VP. And then an NP and a VP can be chunked into a sentence, right here, the first symbol here, NP-VP. So by having chunked getting the symbols and then chunking and successively chunking symbols, I can get to what's called a parse tree of a sentence. Another sentence, for example, is the students ate the cake, and it would be parsed like this, where cake and at and the would be one chunk of an NP, ate is a VBD, and these two, a VBD and an NP, are chunked as a VP. This is one of the rules that we saw earlier, and the same thing happens on the other side. More generally, and more formally, a context-free grammar is defined by 4 parameters. N, a set of non-terminal symbols or variables, or these chunks as we call them. Sigma, which is a set of terminal symbols that are not part of those chunks. So for example, children, students, symbols that you cannot chunk any longer, right? Symbols are the ones that you cannot chunk. So basically words, just pure words. R is a set of rules or productions of the form A goes to beta. All the rules are like this. Like let's look at the rules before. A rule, arrow, and goes to some other, set of symbols. Here's the key, though. The first part of the rule has to be part of the non-terminal symbols. And the second part of the rule can be any string of any length with any symbols either in n or sigma. And we will have an s, which is a starting symbol, or the root symbol. And a language can be defined as a derivation of these rules. Now, these rules to describe, for example, English would be infinite. There are many of these rules. We have to approximate and we have to come up with a model of language, meaning what rules we think capture most of the language, because we'll never get the full extension of it, right? That's the idea of a model. It's useful and it describes main aspects of a reality, but it'll never be complete by nature. So if I have a formal definition of a context-free grammar, and that's my model of language, I will have to respect these, and I will have a lot of production rules. Now, with the grammar above as an exercise for the viewer, can you generate the following sentence? For example, the students in pajamas slept. Can you generate that sentence? The students in pajamas slept. I will leave that as an exercise if you can generate that sentence. It might be that you can't, it might be that you can. I want to know if you can and what would be the parse tree. Also, can you generate 4 random sentences that parse using that grammar? Now, the last thing I want to talk about is this thing of ambiguity. Consider the following phrase. I shot an elephant in my pajamas. This comes from a Groucho Marx line. I shot an elephant in my pajamas. I don't know how he was wearing my pajamas or how he got in my pajamas, right? So what he's talking about is that he shot an elephant that was wearing his pajamas, and not that he was in his pajamas shooting an elephant. How do we know that this is an ambiguous sentence? And the way we know it is that if you go to the grammar above, you'll see 2 ways to parse it. The first way says, I got the action and shot an elephant in my pajamas. And then the chunking here is an elephant in my pajamas, clearly denoting that the elephant was in his pajamas, right? You can check this parse tree and see that it checks out. Or you can parse it like this, with the same rules. I am the noun, right? Shot is the verb, and elephant is chunked separately, and in my pajamas, here, this refers to the verb phrase, which refers to me. It's like I shot, and then in my pajamas refers to I, okay? Is not part of the elephant anymore. It's part of the big sentence, the I. So that's how you can know where sentences are ambiguous, usually because they have more than one parse tree. As a challenge for the viewer, you can try and see if you can create a simple grammar for a programming language that allows variable declarations like variable and then whatever name only with letters equals an expression. And then it allows loops like this, for and whatever variable name, from, and then here's a number to another number, do, and then a block of expressions. And then an expression can also be of the form, because we've talked about expressions, can be either a variable or number, followed by an operator, followed by another variable or number, or just a variable. That's also an expression. Now, the operator can be plus and minus, just for this little language. And then it has 2 statements, print parentheses expression and return parentheses expression. That's the language. Can you define the grammar for this language? That's left to the viewer. Thanks for watching.